Hello, everybody, and welcome to Arda Interprets. Um, I'm definitely copying Cole and Wyatt. When Cole first uploaded his videos, I thought that was a good idea, and then Wyatt copied it first, which now made it fair game. So here we go. Today, I will be interpreting the fourth dimension and trying to explain it to the best of my ability. Let's get started. So I think the simplest and the easiest way of thinking about this is the extrude method. So in most 3D design softwares and engineering, there's a concept called extruding, where if you want to make a 3D shape, first you have to sketch the shape in 2D and then extrude it into the third dimension. For example, you can sketch a square in the XY plane and then give that square depth in the X, Y, and Z plane. So here's your square, and this is your extrusion. It's a simple enough concept and it allows you to create very complicated 3D shapes pretty easily. But I think the best way to think about the fourth dimension is taking a cube in the third dimension and extruding it into the fourth dimension. And fundamentally, this makes sense. You have the 2D and you can extrude it up into the Z plane to get the 3D, but the problem comes with trying to discern where you're extruding the 3D shape to. Where does the cube go? You've run out of space. There's no more axis. So I think the best way to think about this problem is with projections. So let's start in the zeroth dimension. The zeroth dimension would be a dot. That's it. You're a dot. You can't think of anything else because all you are is 1 point. Now that dot can turn into a line, where the line is the first dimension and you can reside at any point on the line. This line then becomes the 2D axis system, where you can reside anywhere in 2D space. And then the 3D axis system. And finally, the 4D axis system, which I can't draw, but we'll get into later. So if you have a shape in 3D, one way to think about this is with projection. So you can have something in XYZ space, and you can project it into the XY plane, leaving you with this square. This 3D projection will turn into this square in the XY plane. You can then take this square and project it into the first dimension, so kind of taking the square and shoving it all into the line, just like as you took this cube and shoved it all into this square here, and project it onto just this line, which then you can project back to the point. I think the best way to think about the space in 4D is to think about its projection into the 3D space. Okay, this is kind of hard to explain, but imagine you're in the second dimension. You cannot look forward, you can just look left and right, but you have a 3D cube. Depending on how you orient the cube, it would look different. The best way to explain this is to think about the opposite, a 2D item in 3D space. Say you have a piece of paper. If you hold it out in front of you, it's like a square. But if you kind of rotate it, it'll turn into like a rhombus shape, and then eventually just like a line if you look at it straight on. You can think of the same thing with these projections. So if you're in 2D space holding a 3D object, it'll kind of look different and warped depending on how you rotate it because you don't have as much space to work with as the item holds. Same is fourth in the fourth dimension. So coming over here, a 4D cube would look something like this. It would be in the 4D axis system. So just like how the second dimension is a cross section of two first dimension lines, and the third dimension is a cross section of three 2D planes. The fourth dimension is a cross section of four 3D axis systems. So you have the X, Y, and Z in all X, Y, and Z. And this allows you to get objects like this, which is just like an extruded cube. You have more. What this animation is doing is showing you like that paper example, whereas how if you hold the 4D cube differently in 3D space, it will look warped and different. This cube would be all the resonance, I guess, if you've taken chemistry, of all of these shapes. This is an example of how you get the 4D axis system, and this is that resonant shape. This diagram kind of explains like the gist of what I've been talking about. You have the dot and the line and the square and the cube, then this object, and it just keeps kind of extrapolating. The reason why these lines are everywhere is because these are all objects that are trying to be expressed in 2D, so the more dimensions you have to show, the more complicated and random the lines get. But in its own space, these would be objects that make sense and can and look correct. So I think fundamentally, like understanding what's going on here is not bad. You're just taking the 3D object and you're extruding it. The problem is, where does that space go? And unfortunately, that's something we as humans cannot really understand because we live in the 3D world. We can't imagine more space. Like where would that be? So it's just something to think about, and I like thinking about things. If there's anything else I end up thinking about, I might upload it here. And until then, goodbye.